Hello, BookTube. I saw a video earlier today on Steve Partridge's BookTube channel in which he shows you a selection of the odd and interesting items that he has littered around his apartment. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating, although for me it lacked a requisite mandatory tenor. So I am hereby weaponizing it into a tag because I want you all to do this. The idea here is to go about these living quarters that we all glimpse in the background and tell us about some of the non-bookish objects that you have surrounded yourself with over the years, and tell us some of the stories involved with them. I very much want to do that, and I'm hoping that you all do it. The only rule, Steve Partridge didn't lay down any rules, but of course the only rule being it cannot be a book. We talk about books until the cows come home here on BookTube. Let's talk about some of the other things. Now, on this channel, there are 80 million candidates, right? Even in view, there are 80 million candidates. There's Stella Luna, there's the Meg Shark, there's the Elephant of Surprise, there's that knitted or crocheted or whatever it is cameo of Frida. There's Wilson, the Penguin, and a whole bunch of others. But I have a selection of things here that I want to show you and that I want to talk about that aren't quite part of that, what a friend of mine refers to as my set. It always feels so weird when she calls it that, because this is my book room. But nevertheless, I know what she means. But I have some other things that I want to show you. We'll start with this. It's not very prepossessing. Some of you who have been here at Hyde Cottage have actually seen it. It's just an ordinary metal goblet that I found at an antique and used item shop on Cape Cod. And got it because I like the no fuss of it. I have a couple of other goblets that are a little fussier than this. I like to drink wine out of a goblet if I can, rather than out of a cup or a glass, because cups fall and glasses break. And goblets don't tend, for me, to do either one of those. I saw it and liked it. It has a plain and simple quality to it, and also a slight imperfection that you can't really tell on camera, but the actual goblet, the actual cup part of this goblet is not quite sitting level on the stand, either through imperfect manufacture at first, or because it took a real dent before it got to that antique shop. But one way or another, I pulled this down off the shelf for a couple of reasons for this video. One is connected with something that I was thinking about just the other day, which is that trip may have been the last, that was about 15 or 16 years ago, that may have been the last time that I will ever go to Cape Cod, which is kind of strange to think about. I would never go there just to vacation. The circumstances would have to be exactly right. I would need, in other words, to be able to bring Frida. And I don't know that that's ever going to happen. So that was reason number one why I grabbed this, because it has achieved an unwanted kind of significance by being, I think, a memento of the last time that I'll be on Cape Cod, which a place I dearly love. And the second is equally melancholy, which is that I got this because I routinely had people over for wine and calzones, and I don't anymore. I had a whole bunch of wine cups and glasses and goblets and whatnot, and on one particular shelf out in the kitchen, and I moved them. Finally, in about May, I moved them. I took them down off the shelf, gave them all a thorough clean, and put them up, way up, on a kitchen shelf that isn't used or touched. There's no traffic up there. I stored them, in other words, because I realized I'm not going to have guests over for wine and calzones anytime soon. It's just, there won't be any way for it to be comfortable. There won't be any way for it to happen. And that was melancholy in its own right. So we'll start off with a Debbie Downer note. This goblet, I don't use it anymore. I don't drink wine when I'm on my own. I don't drink wine when I'm alone. I need festive, friendly company for that, because it has an effect on me as I've reached the ripe old age of 28. Not only does it sort of render me unfit for work. Those of you, any of you who have spent any time around me IRL in real life will know that I pretty much type all the time, or read all the time. I'm pretty much doing one of those two things nonstop. The only times that I do stop are to spend time with Frida, to pal around with Frida, that sort of thing. But otherwise, I am typing all the time, and or reading all the time. And I can't do either one of those if I've been drinking. Especially not if it's prose that's intended for someone else, as almost all of my prose is. It's intended for a readership. And there's no use in doing it. there's just no use in doing it. You might be as high as a kite on your own confidence while you're typing, when you're also sipping wine or a bourbon or whatever. You might be thinking, boy, oh boy, this is great. This is fantastic. This is why so many writers talk about drinking. The next morning you'll see that it's garbage. You couldn't submit it to an editor. You have to do it over again. So that's effect number one. And effect number two is that it tends to make me sleepy, which is not a feeling that I like to have. But so one way or another, I only do it when I'm around friends. And so this is an article from the past. This next one is an article from the past. Well, it could also be seen as a bit of a downer, but these won't all be, and this one isn't, except when a storm breaks. This is a little round, battered picture of my girls. Some of you who have been on with this channel for a very long time will remember my girls. That's my Basset Hound Lucy and my pointer Malin. And this is when they were very, very young. This was their first year together with me. This must be 20 years ago that I took that picture. That's when they were both very, very young. No gray on their faces, no stiffness in the joints, nothing like that. The only things I knew about them at the time were that they were starting to deeply love each other, and that Lucy was crazy, that Lucy was insane, that face was insane. I don't know why, I don't remember why I clipped this picture, and I don't remember why it's loose, but it is loose. It sits on the bookshelves in this room, and it sort of moves. If I need to get at a book, I will place it somewhere else, pull that book out, and just leave it there. So it is migrated all around this room, and I don't quite know why. I have plenty of pictures of my girls, actual pictures of my girls, but this one just sort of lives out and about in the air. I don't really know about that, but it always brings a smile to my face to see them. Now this next one is also just a tiny bit of a downer. This is a prop. It's missing from my background right now, but it ordinarily is in at least, behind me in every video, whether you can see it or not. This is an octopus, a plush octopus. That I received from one of the earliest fans of this channel, a very young girl, who named her Elsa, and who made me promise to put her in a video. Now, I did one better, and Elsa is now in the background of every video. The downer part is that the promise is not being appreciated because she's dead. That young girl is dead. I took this in order to remember that, in order to memorialize her, have her in these videos. We had a lot of fun with this thing. She started out, I forget who gave her this, but it might have been somebody at the hospital. She started out wanting to make up stories about the adventures of Elsa the octopus. But as with so many other young kids that I have spent time with over the years, she became more interested in my stories about actual octopuses, about what they're like. The details of what they're like, how they live, their biology, their evolution. She became much more interested in those stories than in any of her made-up stories about Elsa. She used to say, okay, I would say, do you want to make up an adventure about what Elsa's been up to today? And she would say, no, I want to hear about octopuses. Tell me more about them. How big do they get? How smart are they? How fast are they? I was happy to oblige. Another convert one for nonfiction. And then we have there is no gloom or doom, no death associated with this. It's just my red dragon from Wales that sits out on a bookshelf in the other room. And then we have some hardware. I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try this. It's about destroying everything here because I had to show you. These are odd and interesting things. Most of these things are either decorative or superannuated. Most of them are either things that I just put on the shelves in order to give a little flair to an endless array of books, or they're things that have outlived their usefulness, and I just can't stand giving them away. I can't stand to get rid of them. They have, I guess, what you'd call sentimental value. And this one is definitely one of those. This is my typewriter, my manual typewriter. Belonged to my father before me, and it sits in its case. And I know everything there is to know about this machine. I have written so many words on this machine. So many. I wouldn't even begin to count them. Novels on this machine. Articles by the endless array on this machine. Before the internet, obviously. And I know every single detail of this machine. I know every single part of it. What it does, where it goes, how to take it apart with my eyes closed, how to put it back with my eyes closed. There's nothing, unless a part would actually physically break, and in 25 years of using this thing, not one ever did. Unless a part would have physically break, there isn't anything that I couldn't repair on this machine. I know everything about it because I had to. I absolutely had to. It was necessary for me to do deadline work, for me to correspond with everybody. I conducted my snail mail correspondence on this machine, and on a slew of portable slimline plastic cased machines after this. But the huge bulk of it was done on this machine, and continued to be done on this machine even once electric typewriters started to be manufactured, because I didn't like them. I didn't like the ominous hum that they made when they were plugged in. I didn't like how jumpy they could be. Electric typewriters, most of you won't remember what I'm talking about, but they were as big as boats, and they were the very beginning, although I didn't know it at the time, because computers hasn't been invented yet. But they were the very beginning of the mechanics of typing requiring that you change your habits instead of that you change your machine. It used to be, if you had a mechanical typewriter like this one, that you would just pound away. This gesture is to advance the page. You would just pound away on your manual typewriter, and that was that. And maybe some of the keys would be sticky, and maybe you'd get another manual typewriter and the keys weren't quite so sticky, but that was all. If there was a problem, if there was a change that needed to be made, it was a change with the machine. It wasn't a change with you. Until electric typewriters came along, and then suddenly the change was incumbent on you. I should have seen in embryo, the whole of our technological future, but I wasn't thinking, I didn't see it. Suddenly, I had a typewriter that required that I change my habits. It was still a mindless machine, but I had to adapt to it instead of it adapting to me. Because if you pounded away on an electric typewriter, you would get an alphabet soup of letters. It would just, you needed to touch the key of an electric typewriter to get the impression on the paper. You just needed to touch it, that's all, because the whole thing was electronic, or electric. So there was no need for you to pound away on the keys. There was very much a need to pound on these keys in order to get if you didn't pound on them, they wouldn't make an impression. You wouldn't lift the key. The key wouldn't make it all the way to the paper. The electric typewriter, suddenly that was different. Suddenly, if you pounded on it, then every letter that you typed, you'd get 5, 10, 15 copies of that letter on the paper. Utterly useless. I remember the first few hundred times that I realized that with an electric typewriter, and I was baffled by it. Just baffled, because it was eons ago. I didn't even have the vocabulary to understand what I was talking about, what was frustrating me. All I knew was that all of the instincts that I built up with a mechanical typewriter were useless to me. I didn't know that the future was coming. I didn't know that this was an instance where I would have to adapt to the machine, where I would have to lighten the typing that I had learned on a mechanical typewriter forever and ever. But I did learn. I largely avoided the electric typewriter and stuck with the mechanical typewriter until computers started coming along, and I had a whole slew of them. A whole slew of desktop computers. Even an iMac, one of those, an old iMac where the guts of the computer in the back were in this transparent bubble, so that you could see inside the computer, and it had a little handle. It was the very latest thing in portability, but it still had a tower on the floor. It still had a keyboard that was separate from the machine, and I had no idea when those things were coming out that laptop computers would be possible. I didn't know enough about the technology to think about miniaturization or to believe that kind of miniaturization was possible. Not a lot of people did, right? I mean, the architect of the personal computer said at the dawn of personal computing, I can't imagine a reason why anyone would ever want one of these things in their home. back when it would have required a whole room. So I skipped a step. Most people who are ancient and tedious on this subject, they started out with a mechanical typewriter, they moved to an electric typewriter, and then they moved to computers. I skipped a step. I stayed with my manual typewriter, continuing to feed it new ribbons, continuing to support the entire industry of whiteout strips. Because when you're typing on this thing, of course, there's no backspace. The key is hitting the paper with ink and creating a letter on the paper. So if you type the wrong thing, you've got to correct it manually. You've got to go back and correct it manually. And despite the fact that I type all day long every day and have been typing all day long every day for about 3,000 years, I am one of the worst typists in the world. No exaggeration here. Literally every third keystroke that I make is an error. Literally every third one. If you give me the word only, I will mistype it. I absolutely will mistype it. Those errors go down a little if I am not looking at what I'm typing. If I'm just touch typing, the errors go down a little, but they're still there in an absolutely mind-boggling amount. The greatest thing that has happened to my professional life, easily, is the backspace. It's the fact that on a computer, your document is held in a state of subatomic super suspension. It's held in superpositioning. In other words, you're not committed to it until you commit to it. You can do any change you want to it without needing to fix anything physically. That's going to seem absolutely reductive to those of you who are young, but to me it was just a complete revolution. The backspace was a complete revolution. Suddenly, I could fix my mistakes on the fly without having to worry about the finished copy. Oh, you don't know the heartache. You don't know the heartache of typing your way through a whole page on one of these. You get all the way to the bottom. You're just about to pull the paper out of the machine and put a new piece in when you type something wrong. Right at the bottom of the page. Now, if it's informal, then you can use whiteout or a strip of typing powder to... What you would have to do, since I'm going on this digression, I will stop after a minute. What you have to do if you type something wrong, since it's an ink letter on a paper, is one of the stopgaps was to either daub a white liquid ink over that letter and type it again correctly, or put a sheet of corrective sort of white dust in there and type it into there. It was extremely tedious, and that's only informally. If it was a formal piece, if it was a finished thing of some kind or other, that wouldn't work, because it would be obvious that you did that. So you just have to type a page over. It was a nightmare. So when laptops started being invented, when they started becoming inexpensive, I naturally gravitated to those. Because all my life, I have had dogs who like to be draped or wedged against me when I'm working. All my life that was true. On this manual typewriter, I put it on a stool in front of a chair or in front of a couch. I never put it on a desk if I could help it. Because if I was on a chair or a couch, dogs could come up and sidle around me. They could wedge themselves into my lower back, like one is right now. They could do all sorts of things like that. And we would be together. So I almost never used it on a desk, but when I saw laptops, I suddenly realized, well, this you could use on a bed. There wouldn't need to be a compromise. You could spend your entire time with your babies. So I started getting laptops when they started becoming affordable. And I worked my way through a few until I found one that was a workhorse. It's this thing. An EEE PC. This has an extended battery. We swapped out the old battery is flush with the machine's outline. But we swapped out for a larger battery just for more storage. And this was my laptop for, 7 years? 8 years? Of just my only laptop and solid work, where I would plug this in and just pound away. Now, I think this thing is completely out of power. I believe it is. I charged it up months ago. Yeah, it's completely out of power. But the one way that you can see how much I used this thing, I don't know if you'll be able to make it out. Some of you followed the saga of my MacBook Air, where the A, S, and D keys were wearing out and looking like they were going to crack. They looked like they were going to crack. The plastic was actually going to crack. I ordered replacement keys online, and they weren't the right size. I bought liquid cement to maybe shore them up that way, but it didn't look like I would have the skill to do it. I have a very poor, fine sensory apparatus in my fingertips. Didn't look like I'd be able to do it. I haven't got my surly houseboy to give it a try yet. So I just retired that MacBook. It works perfectly, but I just retired it because I was worried about those keys cracking. And the same thing was true of this EEE PC. I don't know if you're going to be able to make it out, but those keys are stripped of their letters. All the other letters are there, and if you look real close, here you'll see that one is starting to crack. in addition to having worn the letter right off it, these keys are starting to crack. There are hairline cracks in this one, and there are visible cracks in this one. So I don't know how long the EEPC would have lasted, but oh my, I typed so much on this machine. I typed so many, no exaggeration to say that I typed probably hundreds of thousands of words on this machine. It had a software meltdown. Late in its life, around 8 or 9 years in, it had a software meltdown, and it looked pretty severe. We managed to, the tech kid that I had at the time managed to partition its memory and save a lot, but it was never quite the same after that. And at the same time, much better laptops. I don't know how much storage is in this thing, but this is at the same time, better laptops were becoming available, and so I got one, and I've had a succession of them ever since. I'm filming this on one that would have been a miracle to me when this came out. I wouldn't have imagined anything like a MacBook or MacBook Pro when this came out. I would still like to figure out a way. This is Linux, and I used Ubuntu on it, and I am pretty sure that if I fiddled around with this thing, maybe replaced a memory, I could get Ubuntu to run on this again, and maybe I could use it again. I don't really know. I keep the only reason that I've kept it, well, for sentimental reasons, first of all, which is guiding this Knack tour, but for sentimental reasons I kept it because I've done a huge amount of work on this machine, but also because with electronic devices like this, unlike with a manual typewriter, which is not connected to anything, so typing on a manual typewriter would be the purest douchebaggy affectation of I am a writer. It would be the most douchebaggy affectation in the world because there's nothing good that would come of it. What would I use writing on this machine that I did for? What would I use it for? Nothing. It's not connected to anything. It's not networked to anything. I can't do anything with that writing except take it and type it into a machine that is networked, that is connected to things, because the only reason to type is to share it. The only reason to write something like that is to share it. If you want to write something private, you can write it in longhand in your journal. But this is fundamentally different. One of the reasons why I've kept this, in addition to just sentimentality, is wondering if this is improvable. Wondering if this is salvageable. I'd be willing to bet it is. I'd be willing to bet that I could figure out a way, even with my limited tech skills, to monkey this thing around so that it got the internet, so that it connected to the Wi-Fi here at Hyde Cottage, so that I could adapt some version of Ubuntu to this. I know for a fact that it still works on older machines than this. And that I could somehow, through Ubuntu, access some kind of open document format that I could then transfer to editors, to publishers, to whatever. I feel certain that that is possible with this machine. Maybe it's beyond my technical ability, but I feel certain that it's possible. That's one of the reasons that I've held on to it. What a thrill it would be to work on this again. What a thrill that would be. But then that brings us to the last knick-knack for today, and it's pretty big. The knick-knacks usually imply something small, but this one is fairly big, and some of you may have seen it already in my library tour from last year. It's this thing. It's a silkscreen of the cover of the Robert Fagles translation of Homer's Iliad. It's extremely lightweight, and I keep it hung on a wall in the other room. And it comes from a Barnes & Noble. The Barnes & Noble, the big retail bookstore chain here in America, once had a gigantic superstore in downtown Boston, in the heart of downtown Boston. In a ratty old building that we were the first 2 floors. There was a basement that was just terra incognita, just a horrible place to go. There was actually a sub-basement below that most of the store's managers over the years didn't even know existed. I knew it existed. I knew how to get there, but I never divulged that to managers. But that's because the building had a very long history, and I had a long history with the building and the building next door, long before there was a Barnes & Noble there. But it also had stories above. There's a 5-story building plus an attic, so that or 6-story building. 5-story buildings and an attic. And the attic, this particular Barnes & Noble leased out as well. So they had the first 2 floors as you walk in, and then the second floor, and then 3 floors up they had the whole top of the building, which was not partitioned into any kind of offices or rooms or anything. It was so you could look from one end to the other, and that was the receiving area. There was an alleyway in the back. There was a nightmare for trucks to navigate, and that all the stuff was received in there onto freight elevators that then went up to the 5th floor, where they were unloaded and sorted and stored and whatnot. Really ideal in a way, except that the elevators were 150 years old. They were pre-code, and the alleyway was a nightmare. If you had a huge truck with a huge amount of stuff to move in, you had to bring it down one of Boston's notoriously narrow streets, and then somehow back it down an alley that was even more narrow to get to the loading bay. But that Barnes & Noble was wonderful. Oh my, the fun we had in that ratty old store. Oh my, Deb and I had so much fun at that store. And with a largely bookish crew, at a time when that meant something, because this was right before the prevalence of the internet. So when noon and 1 rolled around and all of the business people in the business district right next door had their lunches, when everybody had their lunch at noon or 1 in downtown Boston, and they would flood into the store with bookish questions. Do you have this book? Have you heard anything about it? Is it any good? What's the difference between this edition and another edition? Answers of which they could find online today. Almost all of those answers could be found online, except for the one thing we had that you couldn't find online, which is expertise. And we had it was a long enough time ago so that this bookstore actually did have expertise on tap for its customers. It was so long ago that that bookstore employees actually knew what they were talking about better than you did. They had expertise in just the same way that you would expect from an Apple salesman or a car mechanic or whatnot. There wouldn't be any kind of personal challenge involved in that. You would just expect them to know their product better than you. And our customers had no personal challenge either back then. They didn't think, well, I can read, so therefore I know all about this as much as you do. No, they knew you work with the books. You're here all the time. You presumably follow the book world. So if I come in and say, I'm not interested in any of the Pulitzer winners for this year, but it reminded me that one of the Pulitzers last year did interest me. It was about such and such. Can you tell me what that book was? And whether or not it was any good? And whether or not you have it? That's the sort of thing that a few minutes online can answer now, but at the time, only a trained bookstore worker could do that. So as a result, we were popping. We were a hopping store. It was really busy. But the landlord raised the rent, and the rents were rising just in general anyway. And in the course of one murderously hot summer, we realized that we weren't going to make it, that the store was going to close this location. Now, Barnes & Noble, the company, did right by its employees. They told I don't remember how many of us there were. Deb would probably remember. I don't remember how many employees there were down there. And they offered all the senior employees buyouts. But they also said, you don't have to take the buyout. If you want to stay working for Barnes & Noble, we'll shift you over to the new store across town. All of you. If you want, all of you can go. We're not drawing a limit at that. We're taking care of you. I don't think Barnes & Noble today in 2020 would do that. But back then they did. And a whole bunch of us went to this glass and steel, very new, very professional, lots of natural lighting store. We stuck out like a sore thumb. A lot of the staff at that new store really didn't know a whole lot about books, certainly not as much as we did. And they hadn't been in the front lines of the downtown Boston lunch rush, which was, you had to see it to believe it, especially at Christmas time. Oh my, oh my. But a lot of us went, and there began the horrible, melancholy process of shutting that store down, one step at a time. The delivery stopped. The books started selling, and then we put them on sale, and then we deepened the sale week by week, day by day. And finally, we started packing up and boxing away all of the stock that we couldn't sell at all. And then the store was empty, which was something none of us had seen before. Just empty walls, huge amounts of open space. Of course, the physical features couldn't be removed, so my information desk was still there, and that made it worse. That was actually more painful, not less, because that had been my home for, I don't even know, 20 years. And when it was all over, when a handful of us were going in every day just to chat, and because it was still habit for us to go in, and to do the few wrap-up things that needed to be done, we realized that Barnes & Noble Corporate didn't care about a lot of the stuff that was left. That anything that was left in the store they didn't care about. And that included a lot of things. And one of them was these silkscreen hangings on the walls. And so the manager of the store, wonderful, wonderful woman who was managing the store at the time, just went around and asked people, which one do you want? Do you want one of these? Can you get it out of here? Because it's yours if you want it. And I naturally wanted Homer. I naturally did. And at the time, I was living in South Boston and actually walking to work. Just an enormous right angle. From where I was living in South Boston, I would just walk, over to the main throughway and then up that main throughway to the store. It was just a right angle. It was a long right angle, and on hot days it could be tedious. Actually, on cold days too, it could be tedious. But I liked it anyway. I went right by Fort Point, which I imagine is all gentrified now. But at the time, it was an open expanse of water and piers. It was very nice. It was very nice to sort of knock the cobwebs out after a hectic day at the bookstore. The only problem with this is that I had to lug it that way. It would have taken 5 times as long to take public transportation to do that right angle. It was one of the weird instances in a town like Boston where walking is actually makes more sense than taking public transportation. So I did, and I didn't want to take this on a huge roundabout public transportation route, so I just walked it across all the way home. And that was fun. I'm glad that I have it, because that store is long gone. Not only is it no longer empty, it stood empty for a long time because the landlord was insane. I'm assuming the landlord has died because there is now a shop going in to where my old store was. Pre-pandemic, Deb and I were talking about just meeting up and going in there and just bracing each other for how weird it would be to watch another retail store living in the space where we had so much fun, where we did so much talking with the customers, so much helping people. But of course, the pandemic shut that idea down, so we're not going to do that anytime soon. I haven't been there to see if the store is continued to open or whatever. But anyway, that is what is now the BookTube Knick-Knack tab. And there's just a handful of miscellaneous knickknacks that I have around here that aren't books. And I tag all of you. I tag everybody. I want to see your knickknacks, and I want to hear the stories behind them. So feel free next Tuesday or Tag Tuesday or whenever you feel like it to pull some of those knickknacks together and tell me your tedious stories. And then I'm going to wrap this up for now and put all these things back. I might not put the EEPC back right away. I might power this thing up and explore it again. I seem to remember when I last did that nothing actually worked and that I would have to do something with it. Probably swap out a piece. But I didn't check, at the time, I didn't check eBay or online to find out if maybe those pieces are affordable. Could be. I think I will plug it in and play with it a bit. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.